Enkem, you don't know what you carry. Look at your chest, standing proud, pointing forward like the headlights of a brand new Mercedes, not an inch out of place.
Obiora, you and this your talk. It is just body, my husband. You talk about it as if it is gold bullion locked inside central bank.
It is more valuable than gold. Do you know what other men in this town are suffering with? Their wives are carrying heavy, tired sacks that are falling all the way to their navels. When I walk into the club with you, my chest is high because yours is high. That is why I will protect this beauty with everything I have.
We are young now, yes, but life happens. What of when children start coming?
What if a man was so dangerously obsessed with a single part of his wife's body that he forbade his own newborn children from ever tasting their mother's milk just to keep her chest standing forever? Meet Chief Obiora, a multi-millionaire who didn't care about a woman's hips, her background, or even her character. His entire life was governed by one extreme obsession: finding a woman with naturally upright breasts that pointed forward like twin arrows, and using every penny of his wealth to wage a ruthless war against gravity. He drew up a strict, framed intimacy timetable to touch her only once a week so she wouldn't wear out. He paraded her before high society tycoons like a prized trophy, mocked his friends' aging wives, and locked his own babies on imported powdered formula across 4 full pregnancies, risking their health just to protect the shape he idolized. For 25 years, it seemed his insane gamble actually worked. He believed he had conquered nature itself, until one day the universe handed him a brutal test that completely destroyed his vanity, shattered his marriage, and left him dying alone in a cold, empty mansion. Stay tuned to find out the unbelievable story of the billionaire who tried to outsmart time, and the shocking, tragic end that proved why chasing temporary flesh will always cost a man his soul. Before the luxury cars and the sprawling estate along the hills of Unugu, Obiora had known the bitter taste of poverty. He had clawed his way out of dust and deprivation, trading in auto spare parts, taking massive risks in interstate commerce, and eventually breaking into commercial real estate until his bank account overflowed. Yet, along the road to millions, while other men developed a taste for vintage spirits or designer watches, Obiora developed a singular, uncompromising obsession that governed how he viewed women. Whenever he sat at exclusive gentlemen's clubs in Independence Layout, surrounded by his wealthy peers, his friends' big-bellied men draped in heavy lace and gold chains constantly bragged about women with massive hips, wide waists, and excessive curves. But whenever Obiora looked at their girlfriends and wives, all he saw was untamed excess that had already surrendered to time. The oversized chests of those women hung low, worn down by gravity and negligence, a sight that Obiora found deeply uninspiring. He despised what he called falling glory and refused to settle for a woman whose prime had already begun to sag. To Obiora, a woman's hips or backside were completely inconsequential. She could be as flat as a wooden board behind, and it would not bother him in the slightest. His entire standard of attraction rested on her chest. He craved something rare and architectural, a pair of portable, perpetually standing breasts that defied the earth, with sharp, unapologetic peaks that pointed forward whenever she stood before him. He convinced himself that this specific feature held the secret to unending desire. If a woman had that firm, proud shape, he believed he would never grow tired of her, never look outside his marriage, and never lose the fire of attraction. With his bank accounts fully loaded, Obiora made a solemn vow that he would search every corner of the country until he found this living sculpture, a woman who possessed the exact physique that could satisfy his lifelong fantasy. Word of Obiora's peculiar requirements soon reached the family compound in the village, stirring deep concern among the women who knew the bitter truths of womanhood. Mama Nkechi, an elderly matriarch whose own body bore the honest marks of bearing 6 children, summoned him to the family parlor alongside his 2 elder sisters, Chinyere and Amaka. They sat beneath the whirring ceiling fan, determined to talk sense into a son whose newfound wealth seemed to have clouded his judgment. Mama Nkechi leaned forward, adjusting her wrapper over her knees, and spoke with the measured patience of an African elder. She reminded him that a woman's body was not a carved wooden mask bought from an artisan store to remain frozen in time. She explained the natural laws of the earth, how childbirth, the heavy flow of mother's milk, and the unyielding passage of years would inevitably pull down even the highest, firmest chest. "My son," she said, her voice heavy with caution, "what stands at dawn must bend by evening. Seek a woman who will stand by your side when your own strength fails, not one whose flesh you worship like an idol." Chinyere and Amaka chimed in, laughing at his foolishness, yet warning him of the heartbreaks of vanity. They told him plainly that breastfeeding was the sacred duty of every mother, a bond designed by the ancestors and nature itself to nourish offspring, and that no woman's chest remained untouched by that sacrifice. Obiora only scoffed, waving his hand dismissively at their counsel. He rose to his feet, adjusting his crisp embroidered tunic with supreme arrogance, and told them bluntly that their old-fashioned wisdom belonged to poor men who had no control over their households. With cold resolve, he made an outrageous declaration that left the room in stunned silence. If nothing babies was the reason a woman's chest surrendered to gravity, then his own children would never touch their mother's body. He would buy the finest milk modern science could manufacture, hire private nurses, and banish the breast from the nursery entirely. He was determined to wage war against nature itself, convinced that his wealth could buy an exception to the universal laws of decay. With his resolve hardened and money flowing freely, Obiora launched what became an exhaustive, methodical hunt across the eastern cities. He attended high society weddings, elite fashion runways in Lagos, church Thanksgiving services, and university matriculation grounds, never looking into a woman's eyes first, but always directing his sharp, evaluating gaze straight at her neckline. For nearly 2 years, woman after woman failed his impossible inspection. Either her frame carried excessive weight, her chest lacked the distinct upward lift he demanded, or she relied on heavily padded undergarments that promised what her natural body could not deliver. His breakthrough came on an ordinary, humid Tuesday afternoon in the university town of Nsukka. Obiora had stopped at a quiet, upscale restaurant near the campus when he saw Nkem Dilim serving refreshments at a small faculty reception nearby. She was merely 21 years old, more than 15 years his junior, dressed in a simple cotton blouse that lacked any artificial padding or corsetry. Obiora stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. Nkem Dilim was slender, almost delicate, but her chest was an exact manifestation of the architectural perfection he had spent years imagining. Her breasts were modest, neat, and sat naturally high upon her ribcage, completely defying the humid air with peaks that pointed straight forward like twin bacons. She walked with a natural, unbothered grace, totally unaware that her physical build was the holy grail one of the wealthiest bachelors in the state had been searching for. Without wasting a single second, Obiora abandoned his meeting, introduced himself with all the swagger of his wealth, and demanded her contact. He did not care to ask about her lineage, her temper, her level of education, or whether she harbored any malice, greed, or instability in her heart. To Obiora, character was a trivial detail that poor men used to comfort themselves when they lacked beauty. He showered her modest family with sudden, overwhelming gifts of food, expensive fabrics, and cash, moving the traditional introduction and bride price ceremonies forward at a frantic pace, desperate to claim his prized discovery before another man could notice her. In the traditional culture of their people, a man who married without investigating the character of his bride was likened to a foolish farmer who planted yams in uncharted soil without testing the earth. Obiora had bypassed every customary inquiry. He had not asked the elders of her village about her temper, nor had he sent secret emissaries to discover if strife, madness, or dishonesty ran in her maternal bloodline. He had paid the hefty bride price blindly, driven entirely by his lust for her pristine frame. Yet, in an extraordinary twist of fortune that Obiora certainly did not deserve, Nkemdilim turned out to be a woman of rare, exceptional virtue. Raised by humble, God-fearing parents who valued respect and integrity above all else, she carried a spirit of quiet strength and profound humility. When she moved into Obiora's sprawling, cold mansion with its Italian marble floors and gilded chandeliers, she did not allow the sudden avalanche of wealth to turn her head. Unlike many young women catapulted into high society opulence, Nkemdilim remained gentle, soft-spoken, and deeply accommodating. She treated the domestic staff with unyielding kindness, managed the household expenses with scrupulous honesty, and never threw vain tantrums or demanded frivolous luxuries. Her patience was especially tested by Obiora's intense, suffocating eccentricities. Even in the early weeks of marriage, when his peculiar habits and overbearing physical expectations began to show their true colors, Nkemdilim chose understanding over resentment. She looked upon her much older husband with genuine affection, honoring her marital vows and seeking peace at every turn. When Obiora's relatives paid sudden visits, she welcomed them with warm meals and bent knees, earning immediate praise and whispers of envy among the town's elders. Obiora would often sit in his expansive leather armchair, watching his young wife move serenely about the living room, congratulating himself on a total victory. He truly believed his own luck was merely a reward for his superior taste, completely blind to the fact that while he had only bargained for the transient beauty of the flesh, grace had handed him a jewel of irreplaceable character. Once the traditional festivities died down and the couple settled into their expansive home, Obiora wasted no time unveiling the true terms of his marital empire. To Nkemdilim's utter disbelief, her husband produced a meticulously handwritten calendar that he framed and placed squarely on his bedside mahogany stand, a rigid intimacy timetable entirely dedicated to the preservation of her chest. Obiora believed that the friction of passion, careless handling, and the excessive touch of eager hands were the secret culprits behind a woman's physical ruin. Therefore, he treated his wife's upper body not as a source of mutual affection, but a museum piece that required strict conservation protocols. According to his rules, direct contact, caressing, or oral stimulation of her chest was strictly permitted only once a week, precisely on Saturday nights, and never for more than a few monitored minutes. During their intimate moments on other days of the week, Obiora maintained an unnatural, militant discipline. Even in the height of passion, he would purposely keep his hands locked to her hips or pinned beside her head, refusing to let even a stray fingertip brush against her neckline if the calendar did not grant permission. Nkemdilim found the entire arrangement bizarre and at times deeply comical, yet she tried to reason with her husband with her usual soft-spoken grace. As she watched him inspect the timetable before turning out the bedside lamps, she would lean against the pillows and say gently, "My husband, you are fighting the wind. Flesh is living dust. It will soften, bend, and yield whenever the years say it is time. You cannot freeze the seasons with a piece of paper." Obiora would only scoff, his chest puffing up with unshakable pride as he ran his eyes over her still perfect silhouette. He would lean in close, tap the glass over the framed schedule, and declare with absolute conviction, "Leave the seasons to poor men, Nkem. What I have purchased with sweat and gold I will defend with order. As long as you are under my roof, I will protect your glory at all costs." For Obiora, Possessing such a rare sculpture was only half the victory. The true triumph lay in displaying his prize before the very peers who had doubted him. He became her personal stylist, bypassing the modest lace and traditional high-neck wrappers typical of respectable wives in Enugu, and importing daring couture gowns from London and Paris. Every dress was selected with a single criterion in mind: plunging necklines and structural corsetry designed to accentuate her naturally upright frame. At high society fundraisers, chieftaincy coronations, and exclusive weekend galas at the Enugu Sports Club, Obiora would parade in Kemdilim on his arm like a shining trophy, while the wives of other wealthy tycoons sat comfortably in their layered silk wraps, cooling themselves with feathered hand fans. And Kemdilim was thrust into the spotlight, feeling the heavy, scrutinizing eyes of both men and women upon her exposed chest. At the VIP banquet tables, Obiora took immense childish pleasure in steering every conversation away from business, government contracts, and real estate, and directly toward his domestic conquest. Clinking his crystal glass of cognac, he would cast a mocking sideways glance at his friends' companions, women whose fuller bodies had inevitably yielded to age and motherhood. "Look at you all, carrying burdens you call wives," Obiora would declare loudly over the music, laughing with unrestrained arrogance. "You spend millions on jewelry to hide what has already fallen to the floor. Look at my Nkemdilim, pure craftsmanship, not an inch out of place, pointing forward like the dawn of a new day. While your houses are filled with sagging memories, mine is an eternal fountain of youth." His friends would shake their heads in a mix of irritation and bewilderment, muttering about his lack of home training, while their wives whispered behind their fans about the young bride being treated like livestock on display. Nkemdilim would sit with downcast eyes, her face burning with quiet embarrassment as she bore the public spectacle with polite smiles. To Obiora, her discomfort did not matter in the least. The envy in the room was the only validation his sallow soul craved. The ultimate test of Obiora's strange doctrine arrived when Nkemdilim confirmed her first pregnancy. As the months rolled by, her body naturally shifted. Her hips softened, her skin took on a deep, radiant glow, and she gained weight across her frame. Yet, to Obiora's immense relief and delight, the fullness that accompanied the pregnancy only seemed to enhance her chest, making it sit even prouder upon her ribcage, without an inch of sag.
However, the real battlefield was the delivery ward of the private hospital. The moment Nkemdilim delivered a healthy baby boy, the chief obstetrician and the midwives prepared to place the newborn upon his mother's chest to initiate natural suckling and the flow of essential colostrum. Obiora stormed into the room like an enraged warlord, abruptly halting the nurses. He made it fiercely known that under no circumstances would a child's mouth ever latch onto his wife. The medical team was completely shocked. The elderly doctor, a seasoned physician who had delivered thousands of infants, sat Obiora down in his private office and pleaded with him. He explained the indispensable health benefits of mother's milk, the vital antibodies, the essential nutrients, and the foundational immunity against common childhood illnesses that no factory can replicate. Obiora brushed the medical facts aside with arrogant disdain. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick wad of fresh currency notes, and dropped them onto the doctor's desk. "Keep your medical lecture for those who cannot afford better," Obiora sneered. "My son will lack nothing." True to his word, Obiora had already cleared out an entire storeroom in his mansion, filling it from floor to ceiling with wooden crates of ultra-premium infant formula, imported directly from Switzerland and Holland. He hired 2 full-time, round-the-clock European-trained nurses whose sole job was to prepare bottles, measure temperatures, and handle every single feeding session so Nkemdilim would never have to lift a finger to nurse. When Nkemdilim wept in secret, feeling the painful, unexpressed fullness of her maternal milk and longing for the ancient, natural bond between a mother and her newborn, Obiora ordered heavy binding bandages, and doctor prescribed lactation suppressants to dry up her milk immediately. This cold, artificial ritual was repeated with chilling precision for their second child, their third, and their fourth, 3 daughters in close succession. Across 4 deliveries, Obiora treated his wife's body as private property under an iron fortress, willingly severing one of nature's most sacred human bonds to ensure his prized sculpture remained untouched by the tug of thirsty infants. For nearly 2 decades, the impossible seemed to occur within the walls of Obiora's mansion. Even after the physical toll of 4 4-term pregnancies and the passage of 20 long years, Nkem Dilim's body held firm, her chest, entirely spared from the natural stretching and nursing cycles of 4 children, remained high, compact, and unapologetically upright, resting upon her slender frame as if carved from polished mahogany. Obiora interpreted this rare stroke of genetic luck not as a temporary gift of genetics, but as proof of his own absolute genius. He walked through the streets of Enugu with the puffed-up swagger of a conqueror who had outsmarted nature itself. He truly believed he was the only man alive who had outmaneuvered the laws of the universe, boasting to anyone who cared to listen that money, discipline, and strict rules had defeated the aging process. Whenever they hosted lavish anniversary dinners or joined dignitaries at country clubs, Obiora made sure Nkem Dilim was seen. While other women of her generation, now settled comfortably in their late 30s and 40s, wore flowing traditional bubu gowns and heavy layered silks, Nkem Dilim was still paraded in fitted dresses that accentuated her untouched silhouette. Obiora would raise his crystal glass of vintage wine, catch the gaze of his aging contemporaries, and toast to his own foresight. "Look closely, my friends," he would say with unvarnished arrogance, waving a hand toward her wife as she poured tea for the guests. "You all listen to the old women in the village and let nature ruin your homes. I waged war against the clock, and I won. Look at her, 4 children grown, yet she stands today exactly as she did when I brought her from Nsukka 20 years ago." His friends would force polite, hollow cockles, secretly shaking their heads at his insufferable vanity, while Nkemi merely offered a faint, tired smile. She knew what her husband refused to accept, that youth was not an eternal prize, but a fleeting visitor, and that the clock never truly stops for any mortal soul. Obiora basked in this dangerous illusion of eternal victory, completely oblivious to the cold, unsparing storm that the coming years were preparing to unleash upon his life. The turning point arrived without fanfare, stepping into Obiora's life not with the grand spectacle of a battlefield, but in the quiet, merciless creeping of time. By his late 60s, the iron frame he once carried began to fracture from within. It started with sudden bouts of dizziness, unquenchable thirst, and a dark numbness that slowly crept into his feet. The diagnosis was swift and brutal. Advanced, poorly managed type 2 diabetes, complicated by failing kidneys and severe hypertension. Almost overnight, the proud, boastful tycoon was dismantled. The man who once wore bespoke silk shirts and walked with a king's swagger was now reduced to shuffling around his marble mansion in loose cotton trousers and rubber slippers, his body swollen from fluid retention. His days, once dominated by board meetings, real estate deals, and high society galas, shrank into a miserable loop of blood glucose monitors, daily insulin injections, and grueling 3-day-week dialysis sessions that left him shivering and nauseous in private hospital wards. In this valley of constant pain and fear of death, the intense obsession that had governed his entire adult life evaporated like morning mist under a blazing sun. The rigid touch timetable, the vanity schedules, the imported couture dresses,
all of it instantly became meaningless trash. Obiora's mind, once entirely consumed by flesh, was now terrified by numbers on a digital monitor and the cold dread of an early grave. As the years pushed into Nkemdilim's late 40s and early 50s, nature finally claimed what was rightfully hers. Without the youthful elasticity of her 20s, her skin gradually softened, the farm lines rounded, and her chest yielded to the inescapable pull of time, settling naturally into the gentle, modest frame of a mature African mother. Yet, the cruelest irony was that Obiora did not even notice the change. On mornings when Nkemdilim entered his room dressed in the very low-cut nightgowns he had once spent thousands to purchase, Obiora never even raised his heavy, sunken eyes from his medication tray. If her exposed chest brushed against his shoulder as she leaned over to adjust his pillows, there was no spark of desire, no pride, no frantic attempt to protect its shape. His tired, bloodshot eyes were fixed solely on his pill bottles, desperately checking if his blood pressure medicine was due. The physical idol he had spent a lifetime guarding with calendars, money, and cruelty had turned completely invisible before the harsh, unyielding reality of human mortality. The final reckoning did not come with an explosion of anger, but in the crushing silence of an empty home. For nearly 3 years, Nkemdilim carried the brutal weight of nursemaid, cook, and caretaker. She cleaned his bed sores, monitored his agonizing dialysis recoveries, measured his strict diabetic meals, and endured his bitter, disease-induced mood swings. Yet, in all those exhausting months of service, Obiora never once looked into her eyes with true gratitude. Even in his sickness, his heart remained narrow. He saw only his own suffering, completely blind to the woman who was quietly spending her remaining strength to keep him alive. One dry Harmattan morning, Nkemdilim stood at the edge of his bed, holding out a glass of warm water and his morning insulin dose. As Obiora took the glass without a single word of thanks, his eyes glued to the digital readout of his blood pressure machine, something inside her finally snapped. The realization washed over her with crystalline clarity. She had spent over 25 years living not as a beloved partner, but as an ornament in a golden cage, prized solely for flesh that had now surrendered to time. Quietly, without shouting or drama, Nkemdilim set down the medicine tray. She packed 3 modest suitcases, kissed her grown children who had already moved out to build their own lives, and walked out through the heavy iron gates of the Enugu estate, leaving the key on the marble hallway table. She chose her own peace and dignity over a marriage that had never truly seen her soul. When the domestic staff finally broke the news to Obiora, the massive mansion felt as silent and cold as a tomb. He sat in his orthopedic armchair, the whir of the dialysis machine his only companion. It was there, in the hollow stillness of his final years, that the crushing truth broke through Obiora's stubborn pride. He looked at the dust-covered framed calendar still sitting on the side table, the ridiculous schedule he had once used to protect what was guaranteed to fade. He remembered his mother's warnings, his sister's laughter, and the way he had denied his own innocent children their mother's milk, all in pursuit of an illusion that could never survive the grave. Flesh had fallen just as nature ordained. His wealth could not buy health, nor could his past conquests keep him warm at night. In the end, Chief Obiora spent his remaining days completely alone, nursing his failing body in a grand empty palace, a ruined king who had traded a lifetime of genuine love and companionship for a handful of fleeting dust.
Thank you all for watching this amazing story. Kindly like and subscribe so you won't miss other stories that would be uploaded in the future. See you in the next video.